Hello, and welcome to the Brenton Peck Podcast, where we share people's stories and the values that shaped them. Today's guest is David Mark Brown, author, storyteller, and explorer of what he calls the invisible real. It's great to have you on.
Yeah, thank you, Brenton, for having me.
Yeah. So I have to ask, what is the invisible real?
The invisible real, sort of the best terminology I've come up with, and I'm not actually, there's probably no way I made that up, but just between the stuff I've read and come across for describing reality outside of the material. So I'm about as far over on the other end of the spectrum, I guess, as you can be from like a materialist who just doesn't acknowledge a spiritual realm at all. I think that the spiritual realm is actually pretty significant, very real, and the stuff done there affects the stuff in the, I guess what we would call the material world, and stuff we do in the material world affects the stuff that happens in the spiritual world. So rather than calling it the spirit realm, I just started calling it the invisible real.
It's more catchy.
Yeah, it felt more catchy and maybe easier. Maybe to not trigger, like if you call something heaven, well then that's loaded with all kinds of baggage for people depending on, where they're coming from and their perspectives and worldviews. And if you call something the spirit world or the spirit realm, that has a whole other set of baggage and ideas that go along with it. And so just as an author and a storyteller, it felt cleaner to just kind of come up with something that wouldn't trigger people.
Yeah.
So the invisible real, I felt like, well, that's descriptive of what I'm talking about and hopefully will be somewhat intuitive, but without triggering certain, camps or tribes of people. So
yeah, I've read a number of authors that work with kind of that realm. Frank Peretti comes to mind. But again, a lot of that more, like you put it, triggering language that can be very off-putting to people that I don't think necessarily has to be there. Yeah.
Well, and, and that's, as someone, trying to write stories and tell stories, I mean, language, right? Language is the medium that, I play in. And so just trying to come up with ways that communicate well is a constant hobby and activity and thing to toy around with.
Yeah. So a little bit on your background, how did you get into writing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, writing certainly started young. And I'm not sure why. I mean, I've always felt more comfortable expressing myself in written word than spoken word. I mean, I don't have any problem with speaking in front of people or whatever, but my thoughts don't come out as clearly, I find, when articulated verbally as written. So, I mean, I think even as a little kid, the story that my mom told me and repeated because she thought it was funny, so that I remember from the earliest, was the story I wrote, I don't know, second grade maybe, and turned into a teacher, but it was entitled The Human Being. Like I spelled it like a legume because I'm still a terrible speller. So I was trying to write a story about a human being, but it ended up being like a person, being, legume combo, I guess, in the title, The Human Being. So she thought that was funny. But anyway, yeah, that's something I've been doing for as long as I can remember.
Nice. I want to get better at writing because I feel like my speaking isn't always the sharpest. My mind runs simultaneously faster and slower than my mouth, and I trip over a lot of my words. But I find I'm a little OCD when it comes to writing. I never could journal because I would mess something up and tear out the page and restart 20 times.
Yeah. Not a problem I've experienced, but I get it. Yeah.
When did you start writing more fiction?
So yeah, writing stories, and telling stories all throughout elementary, high school. For a while, it was a lot of poetry. And I guess, in university years, managed to carve out enough space to take a handful of creative writing courses just while I was getting my major. So that was always something that, in the end, I took maybe 18 credits or something just of poetry and fiction writing. And then going to work with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship right after graduation kind of led to the lifestyle that, perpetuated what I was doing in college because, I was working with college students. So staying up late, not necessarily getting up that early. So even those early staff years on university, that was my first foray into trying to write nonfiction. So I wrote and published one book with InterVarsity Press. That was my attempt at the time. Now I'm going to forget her name. The Peretti culture was in full swing.
Yep.
Elizabeth, I don't remember. This is sad. Sign I'm getting old. But I think I Had Kissed Dating Goodbye was also had just been written, possibly. And before that, was all of the purity. It was just all the rage. And so my kind of response to that was one of well, what about for all the rest of us? Who this just doesn't work. I refuse to believe that, if I don't somehow have the ability to conform to this ideal, then I'm just evil, right? Because the other end of the spectrum is I guess if I can't stay pure, I'm just a bad person. And, having been a university student and then having worked with university students, I wasn't the only one feeling kind of this, burden that came along with trying to find God and pursue God and be Christ-like, but at the same time know that there's some stuff in me that's not always super Christ-like. And beyond that, why was I told for so many years that my body is such a bad thing? And so just kind of trying to cope with all of that. My response was, Tainted Love was what we ended up calling it. So that was, my first published book was nonfiction. It was a relationship book. That was a response against purity culture, saying, hey, tainted love, that's a human thing, and God's a forgiving God, so you'll be all right.
Yeah. I saw another book that piqued my interest. I can't remember the name of it, but talking about the martial artist and his journey.
Yeah, Empty Hand Revolution.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was another mostly nonfiction. We changed some of the times and places and people's names to protect the guilty and the innocent. That was a fun one that was written essentially as a gift and fundraiser for Cosmo Zimic, local dojo instructor, and a guy who just has a pretty interesting life. And I was taking both of my kids there at the time, and just as I was kind of listening to him encourage the kids and share, with parts of his story of, his protecting, as a small child trying to protect his mother, when, because he's from a tribal area that has, felt that they were never part of India, but India felt differently. And so troops would routinely be sent in to kind of quell the natives and let them know that they needed to be properly subject to the Indian government. And at times that, would involve violence toward the locals. And so the story he gave about just kind of standing up to a soldier who was trying to knock his mother to the ground, and just learning from like the behavior of his older brothers, and through that experience, like, well, what did it mean, to be a defender of people? What did it mean to be like a champion or like a hero or, a warrior? And so that was kind of the terminology that for a while, he went off the rails into all this, violent behavior that's what most of the world recognizes it means to be a warrior and a trainer of warriors. And then eventually looped back around to, like, this is not what it's like to be a true warrior at all, but to care for people, to respect people, to honor people, to be strong when you need to be strong, but to also be able to be humble and to be respectful and kind and loving, and, to lift people up and find, people that need to be lifted up. And so that, he, like I said, it's been a circuitous route for him, but that was just a super fun book to write. Went to India with him, traveled around in his region, his neck of the woods, at times being escorted. We had a fun, like, black suburban urban escort from the hotel to the airport to get out. That was like a total movie moment, where like the city had been shut down because there was an Indian ambassador or some secretary of something that was coming into the same city that we were in currently, just to sort of assert their power. And so, but everything there is run by the tribal group that's in power. So they were like, oh, so you think you're going to come and exert your power? So they, instilled martial law and told everyone to stay home. And, there were armed people on every street corner. And we're like, well, we need to get to the airport. He's like, no problem. Like, my brother knows all these people, so make a couple of calls. Like, these two black Suburbans pull up in front of the hotel. They're like, you get in that one, you get in that one, and we were just like zipping around through town to the airport. No traffic out, nobody in the way. So it's like, okay, this is an interesting moment. But a lot of moments like that, just kind of taking in, the world that he grew up in, and and just kind of getting to write a book about that perspective, and share his journey, and then just kind of give him the book. Every now and then he'll send me a message and be like, hey, can you, order another so many copies? And then I just, give them to him so that he can sell them as a fundraiser or whatever for, as he travels or promotes the dojo. And
nice.
So that's been a fun thing.
Yeah. I need to get it and read it. I've been very curious. But
it's an amazing story. Yeah.
There's a lot of parallels as you were talking. The phrase that comes to mind is better to be a warrior in a farm than a farmer in a war. And that's a common motif. You think like gladiator movies or a lot of these things, they don't want to go back to war. They'd rather be the farmer, but they have the capacity.
Yeah.
But I'm curious how some of those experiences, because those are two of your nonfiction books, did that have a big impact on your desire to write fiction books?
Yeah, I mean, fiction, I think, is always a more natural medium for me. The nonfiction just pops up from time to time, and I'm fine with doing it. But again, like almost like speech, I don't feel like my brain is always organizing the content in a way that is intuitive for other people. And so it's a much more difficult process for me to write nonfiction. The process of going from me through an editor and back to me and through the editor, and is more laborious because there's just so many things that they're like, okay, I don't know why you're going in this pattern to try to describe this, or why are you talking about this before you've talked about that? And yeah, so that's just something I've kind of come to recognize about my own processing, where storytelling feels more intuitive, I guess, to reveal, because when you're revealing a character, I mean, unless you happen to be starting with the moment they're born, which I'm sure some books do. I haven't experimented with that. It's not linear.
No.
You're starting at a spot and, jumping into the story. And then, you can fill things in as you go. And, that to me is easier to kind of suss out, of like, well, this is a perfect moment to have this backstory, come in here. And so that I think is more natural to me. But, if your fiction isn't driven by real life experiences and with real people and real relationships, then it's obviously you're going to have a hard time connecting through the fictional stories with your readers. So for sure, my experiences and a lot of the, nonfiction that's come out of those experiences, right? It all goes into flavoring the fiction for sure.
Yeah. I've tried my hand at writing a few times, and I find I get a little stuck. Mostly, I am very big on context, and it's almost like I get stuck in the world building because I need enough context, enough surrounding it to build what I'm trying to convey. Because I don't, like, if you're writing an autobiography or something, it's a lot of factual or retelling of history. It's not the same need to set the entire context and surroundings. Whereas, like, I'm wanting to write a fantasy series. Right. And in storytelling, there's so much symbology and certain ways of saying things that are almost like a standard depending on what time period you're writing in, where it's just, this is, if you're within this trope, I guess for lack of a better word, if you're within this trope, there's a lot of baked in context that you can build on top of. So it's, how do I write appropriately for the genre that I'm in, making use of the tropes without just being a plain trope? It's given me a lot of trouble focusing through that.
Well, if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like kind of the difference between trying to write Middle Earth and trying to write the story of Bilbo Baggins. Like when you're writing the story of Bilbo Baggins, well, you're going to have to explain some of Middle Earth, but you're not writing an extensive history of Middle Earth.
Yep.
You're writing the story of one hobbit, that lived at one point in one time.
Yep.
And so for an autobiography or whatever, I guess the rules and restrictions are like straightforward. Like I'm writing, about this person, and, it might involve me having to explain a little bit about his, tribal background and, the world that he came out of and the world that he went into. But for the most part, you're sticking with this one person. And so, generally, right, I think most of fiction, it ultimately comes down to the same thing. You just have to invent the character, which we all know is just going to be an amalgam of all the other people you've met in your life. Yep. That you're picking the appropriate pieces from this person and that person and this person and trying to format like a fictional individual. But, there is no such thing really. It's just, if you build the character well anyway and they're believable, they're just going to be, a combination and that maybe doesn't exist in real life, but all the different pieces are all just coming from real people, and you're just blending them together in maybe a little bit of a unique way.
I like that. The series I'm working on, the other challenge I have is I can kind of get what the character is in my mind, but I know I want a character journey, character transformation. Right. So then it's like, okay, how do I map the character transformation across the timeline in the right way so I know where I'm at in both?
Right. And giving characters permission to change,
Yes.
even if it surprises us, I think can be hard as an author. So especially, I think, if we want to create a very likable character that remains very likable. And so I think for me, an easy cheat on this is I write about jerks a lot. And then it's really easy, for that character to grow and, to get, or even just to like, maybe they're always a jerk, but to have a reader get to a point to where they understand why this person's a jerk and, begin to root for a jerk. And, to show progress even, and I'm trying to remember now I recently read this idea. Oh, I think it was a book by The Expectation Gap, I think is what it's called, by Cuss. Cuss is his last name. I'm pretty sure that this is where I'm drawing this from. But just the idea that we, as people, we don't really change that much, and the spiritual life, if we have this idea that, we're going to be one total kind of person and then we're going to like meet Jesus and be a different person, which I do think is a religious idea, that like I'm going to have this conversion moment and I'm going to be a different person. I think he spends some time in his book, though, trying to focus on the fact that, like, Paul, for example, was still Paul.
Yeah.
Like, he had a significant life-altering moment, but he was still a loud, opinionated, Roman citizen. He was still essentially the same person. That, he flipped, the motivations behind what he was doing. Or, someone like Peter, still brash, right? Act before you think. His encounter with Jesus didn't change him into suddenly being this thoughtful, pre-planned individual. And that the goal of our life shouldn't be to like become someone else, whether we're highly spiritual or not. It shouldn't be like, oh, I've been this person, I need to become a different person. I'm still going to be me.
Yeah.
So ideally maybe I can be a little better version of me, or however people like to phrase or express that. And so that's, when we're thinking of character arc, right? Like, it's not that I need to make my character become a totally different character, but, how do they grow in a sense to where they're still essentially themselves, but they maybe have become smarter. They've maybe become a little more patient, or they've maybe become, a little more skilled in this area, a little wiser, a little less likely to, be prejudiced or, to make a certain assumption that they got fooled on a couple of times, but they don't do anymore. And so, yeah, character growth, I think, can be as simple as just, someone gets burned once and they're not going to make that mistake again. That's character growth.
The end result to me, what comes to mind is almost like a little more dynamic, like still all the same stuff, but you can apply it a little more in different situations now. You start out kind of almost like you have your personality, but it's very shallow, applies in one situation, and by the end, your personality is still the same, but it's deeper, and you can apply it more broadly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's enriched, deeper. Yeah. Fits across more circumstances. Yeah, I like that. More broad.
One thing I've read on a couple of your Substacks, you really like bridging gaps. What brought you to that?
Yeah, there's been something innate in me from, I guess, as early as I was able to process this type of thing. Not that I'm not by any means a peacemaker in the sense of like, I can't exist with conflict, because I very much can live within a world of conflict. But of trying to integrate things that at least people commonly insist don't fit together. Very early in my Christian journey, I recognized that something like the division, for instance, between religion and science made no sense to me whatsoever. Like, it took me a long time to even wrap my head around why this was a contentious thing for people. So in some senses, it's my ability to like integrate disparate things sometimes makes it difficult for me to understand why those things are considered disparate by most people. So, I mean, my sort of cheeky online handle on some social media sites, any of them that I've been on for very long, because this was the one I was using for a long time, is the redneck granola. I just looked this up the other day, and like, there's now somebody calling himself the granola redneck, which I thought was kind of offensive. He's been doing more. He's got more Google juice right now than I do, so he's been, overtaking some of my top 10 listings on Google. But yeah, the redneck granola was something I guess I've been using for 20 years, just as growing up in Texas and then going to university in Montana. And I kind of joked with people when I got to school in Missoula, but it wasn't really a joke. Like, I didn't know what recycling was when I dropped out of, growing up on a ranch, being an actual cowboy in Texas, to school in the middle of the forest in Missoula, which is, it's a granola area. When I was there, it was known as the Berkeley of the Rockies. And so, like, one of the amusing vignettes, I suppose, I was changing my oil on my car, because you grow up in rural Texas, you change the oil of your own vehicles. So, I mean, I didn't know any different. I'd never been to a Jiffy Lube. I didn't know those things existed. And so I was in the parking lot of the university changing my oil, and I just dumped the oil and down the drain in the parking lot because, we just dumped it on the ground, and you would spread it on the road, so it'd keep the dirt down. I didn't understand that there was anything that could be considered controversial about this. And a couple of girls walking by started, upbraiding me and yelling at me for destroying the environment. So I had to kind of go look up, like, okay, why is this bad? Like, I had no comprehension of that being a bad thing at all. Yeah, and like I just, recycling wasn't a thing in Texas in the early 80s, and so I didn't know what that meant. But yeah, my years in Missoula converted me to an extent. So then I started kind of integrating the things that I enjoyed and still appreciate about my redneck, upbringing with my granola conversion. Because again, in my mind, it's like, why could these things not live together? Like, I could be someone who's a manual laborer and that works outside and believes in, kind of the purity of hard work, kind of cleansing you. And then at the same time, be someone that is enlightened to know that I shouldn't dump my motor oil down the storm drain, and that, certain things should be recycled instead of thrown into the back of the truck and allow them to blow out onto the road. So yeah, that was kind of the first example I guess I can think of. But, since then, just having lived in urban contexts, having lived in rural contexts, having lived, among liberals and conservatives, and always just trying to find the convergence and overlap and places where people can come to agreement or at least come to the table.
Yeah.
Reading recently a book by Jonathan Rauch, I think that's how you would say his name, writer for The Atlantic and a lot of different publications. He's a materialist. And so that one has been a challenge for me. It's like, oh man, like, where's the overlap, And yet, one of the books he's written recently is about kind of the necessity of Christianity in America for the survival of democracy. Even though he's like, I don't believe in God. I certainly don't believe in that Jesus was God. And so that has been an interesting read, but I find myself kind of setting it down sometimes and just like, wow, like this is an outrageously different perspective on the world than the one that I have. That is leaving me struggling with like, okay, how do I find the overlap here? How do I integrate these things? But it's a fun mental challenge.
Yeah. I always like trying to find ways things can come together too. Talking on like the need to understand Christianity, even if you don't believe it, to uphold democracy. It's like, you don't have to believe it, but you have to understand the U.S. was founded on those principles.
Yeah. So
you need to understand those to understand what the founders were thinking. Like, you don't have to agree with it,
right.
But at some level you can bridge that gap by saying, I at least have to understand it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really interesting. I mean, and he describes the, central message of Christianity, I think, better than a lot of preachers that I've heard. And, he's, like I said, I mean, he's a materialist that doesn't believe in any of this. And yet, like, he understands quite clearly and expresses very elegantly. And in other areas, I think he's still, it's like, come on. Like, how could you believe this? How can you believe that only what you can taste and touch? And like, I'd love to have a conversation with him, just about, you've never had some experience that you couldn't explain, beyond like the stuff you can put in your hand, like that's the limit. Like, there can't be anything else. That's a hard place for me to stay in.
There was some fun philosophy, I forget who, but exploring a lot of that. And it's like, it's more likely that we're in a virtual reality than we are in an actual world. That, I may be the only actual real person, everyone else is a part of the simulation. Or you may be, and I may be just a figment of the simulation. But to say only what you can interact with, it's like, how do you bridge that gap? How do you answer some of those questions?
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, The Matrix, of course, like blew my mind when the movie was first out. That I was doing campus ministry at the time, and I think like one of the students was like, "Oh my gosh, I saw this movie," and so then I went with him to see the movie, and then I was like, so then I grabbed like 5 other students, and we went to see the movie again. It was just like one of those moments that cinematically it was just like, okay, I got to go down this rabbit hole a little further.
Yep. I love mind benders like that.
Yeah. The simulation.
You can say there's similar aspects of the invisible real that come to mind. Even just thinking like Harry Potter, where it's like they keep their world so carefully concealed. You'd never know there's wizards walking among you, but...
Yeah. And how many of us are muggles?
Yes.
In the real world. And what defines us as a muggle what's going on in the space around me right now that I don't have any ability to see whatsoever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Realizing you're a muggle or suspecting that you're a muggle, is an interesting place to be.
Yeah. I have to say my favorite reading has always been more towards epic fantasy. So some of my favorite series were like the Sword of Truth series by Terry Goodkind or the Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. I've had a lot of fun with epic fantasy. I think for me, it allows me to think more abstractly. I don't always like being stuck in a box. I want to think outside the box and approach things. But I like that they still walk you through values and moral systems. Yeah. So I've always kind of been drawn to those. The stories you're writing take another avenue. You like a lot of apocalypse, and you said some of the jerks. So what has inspired some of your stories, and which has been your favorite?
Well, so along those lines, I guess, Cormac McCarthy, I think, is brilliant. Something like The Road would be considered in that, I guess, both sense of the word, possibly apocalyptic, in the sense of revealing, what it would mean in this kind of the biblical, I guess, definition of an apocalypse, and then also kind of obviously the end of a world, apocalypse both. And so, yeah, I mean, I enjoy playing around with that kind of concept too, where you might be revealing in the apocalyptic sense of like, here's a revelation, but putting that in a drastically different world. I mean, the fun thing about the genre apocalyptic, the modern genre, the fictional genre, not the biblical genre, is again, like, your draw to epic fantasy. I think I'm drawn to the what-ifs. Mm-hmm. And so it's, not too big of a stretch to go, 100 years down the road, or in some cases 15 or 20 years down the road, and just be like, what if this?
Yeah.
And it's as simple as, sometimes a nuclear holocaust, or sometimes, an EMT, or climate disaster, or, a plague that releases some kind of zombie virus into the world, right? I mean, all those things are, I'm a fan of all the different apocalyptic possible endings, because it's fun just to speculate about that. And then it just is, it's a total cheater, it's like a total cheat code into like instantly just throwing characters into these extreme situations, right? And that's again, I think a part of what's really fun about fiction is that, we want to imagine, well, how would I respond, if the world came to an end, or yeah. If, zombies, this or that, or like, so, I mean, it's one thing, to be like, well, how would I respond in a quite realistic scenario? But like, it's, more, I think, interesting and enthralling for a lot of us if we just make that scenario a little more outlandish.
Yeah.
But then are able to deal with the same issues. One of my favorite characters, and this is actually kind of a little bit of an alternate history series, a little bit of weird Western series. But there's a character just known as the Reefer Ranger. I mean, he has a name, but like broadly, like, within the folklore of the world that he exists in, he becomes known as the Reefer Ranger for a variety of reasons. But he's a jerk. Again, I like writing jerks. He's a Texas to begin, and he begins his story as a Texas Ranger. But he's very black and white. And, you know, he's a Texas Ranger very early on. And so it's like his life, you know, takes place in that world where Texas has just sort of become a thing. You know, the Mexican Revolution, you know, is still in recent, you know, knowledge. And he's put in a position to, you know, and this is where it becomes quite relevant, right, to defend the border. And so this is another one of those places where I'm drawn to, you know, borders in general, you know, where two different things, we draw a line and we say at this line, this thing becomes another thing. But we have now these two places kind of colliding on this spot that we just decided is now a border. And so for him, there's that tension. He's a racist jerk, right? He sees a lot of the problems that are spilling over into his new precious homeland, being a result of Mexicans and spilling over from Mexico. You know, his experience of marijuana is it's something that comes across from Mexico. You know, it's dirty, just like the dirty Mexicans that are bringing it. But he's got a very black and white definition of the world. And there's some of the stories like he's a hero, and like you know, I like for readers to wrestle around with like, so, you know, you're all of a sudden you find yourself rooting for this guy, and then you back up and you're like, no, he's a racist jerk. I can't like this guy. But at the same time, like, he's a badass, you know, like he does some things that you're like, oh wow, cool, like, and you're rooting for him. And oh no, he's a racial jerk. Like, he's a racist jerk. I can't.
Just that tension and back and forth.
Yeah, and so playing around with that. But of course, you know, over time, being able to play with his character and have him get to a place where he begins to understand, like, you know, I pit him in a story with a Mexican character who challenges him to change the way he views, you know, like with any prejudice, and, you know, like, okay, not all Mexicans are the same. Yeah. And so then he has to start, like, you know, but ultimately, right, he doesn't become a person that lives, like, he still is a judgmental person.
Yep.
He still has a very strong, you know, driving, you know, he's never going to go and become a chaos character. Like, that's just not his thing. But also he, at the same time, is forced to enter a world with more gray. Yeah. And so that's, you know, and so that's what's fun to do as a storyteller. Like, okay, I'm going to take this person who's very black and white, and I'm going to mess around with him. You know, I'm going to break his world a little bit and just kind of see how he responds. And sometimes it surprises me, you know, like I don't always know, you know, how he's going to respond. Characters can grow in that way sometimes too, and it's fun.
Well, and when you put them in extreme circumstances, which any apocalyptic type of thing would do, your responses can vary even outside of what your normal character would do. You may have a set of values, morals, ethic. You always respond this way. Then you're put in a certain situation. All of a sudden, you do something completely opposite of what you've got expect.
Two things that conflict with each other.
Yep.
You would normally do this and that and that and that, but they're meeting, and now you got to choose. And so how is the character going to choose? And like you were saying, that's fun, I think, for readers, because that gives us an opportunity to like put that on and try it out. And
yeah.
Like, oh, okay. So like, you know, if there was an outbreak of some deadly retrovirus and like I was left with the decision to like shoot people in order to prevent it from spreading, or to just let it spread, would I shoot people? You know, or would I find another way? You know, but, you know, like.
I mean, we walked through a real life of that with COVID. Do we lock everyone down? Do we take personal freedoms? Do we allow that? Like, how do we respond?
Yeah. What do we do? How far are we willing to go? You know, who are we ultimately, you know, trying to protect? And yeah, we have to figure out who we are and ask those questions and
play with that tension.
Yeah. And just, I think the important thing for me has been to understand, my motivation, but then also to understand other people's motivations. And so if I can understand that this person isn't coming from a completely different opinion as me from a place of contentiousness or hostility, but they're coming from that place of as much conviction as I'm coming from mine,
Yeah.
well, then I can sit down and say, like, okay, like, explain to me, that your convictions are different from mine, but, to be able to understand the motivation and that's the thing where I feel like in the society we live in now, right, this becomes kind of my, I don't know if burden is the right word, but I've had to, I think, accept over the last few years that my inclinations qualify me as a prophet. And that's it sounds dumb to me still. And there's a part of me that's like semantically, like, I got to come up with a different word for this because it's another one of those trigger words.
Yep.
But like thinking about what, prophets have been throughout the history of humanity, my understanding, my definition is that they're people who are to call people back to the better versions of themselves. So like if within a cultural group, people are straying away from what made that culture what it was, a prophet would be the person that would say, look, guys, this isn't us. Like, we're going down the wrong path here that is ultimately going to lead us to a dark place,
Yeah.
So the light's over here and the darkness is over there, and you guys are, barreling headlong into the darkness. So, having to admit to myself, like, okay, this is me. This is what I'm trying to do in my fiction. This is what I'm trying to do in my relationships. It's constantly been, and that was, I think, the reason why I was always trying to, like, figure out how to fit disparate things together. And, it's to understand where people are coming from and where they're going, but then at the same time to be like, are you sure? Like, this doesn't seem smart to me. Like, this is not a solid idea. And so where we're at, I feel like in America currently is one of those places, where it's like, seems like a bad path to be going down.
Yeah.
And not at all where we were going at one point. But if we are to get to a healthier place, how do we reawaken things like spiritual integrity and pluralism at the same time, and allow for, freedom of religious expression and not just freedom of my form of religious expression, but not yours.
Yep.
And all the kinds of, symptoms that I feel like are plaguing the sort of hyper-individualized, weird morphing process that we've undergone. We've applied some heat recently, and so like metamorphosis has happened, if you're in the world of geology, I suppose. And it's, we've become something a bit different than we were before the heat was applied. But yeah, I'm not necessarily sure I like it, but we are. So now what do we do?
Hindsight's 20/20,
Right.
But foresight's
Yeah.
might as well be blind. I like playing with the tension of cultures You can delve a lot into the way a person thinks based on the culture that they're within. And I don't just mean culture like a racial culture, like that applies to any group. You have a work culture, you have a church culture, you have a country culture, you have a family culture. And so if you can kind of delve into the amalgam of what are the cultures that person's in, you can learn a lot about a person. And you look at Asian cultures compared to US, or even Mexican cultures or Hispanic cultures, they are much more, I forget the name for it back when I took cultural psych and anthropology, but they are much more about the family, about the whatever their group is being part of that. And the US is much more individualistic.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I've seen a lot of people from those cultures have more individual personality because they're being respectful of other people and interacting with that culture. And it's this conundrum in my mind where a lot of Americans think, if I'm respectful of other people, then I'm not being respectful of myself. And you get in that tension where it's sometimes like rules can be freeing, which isn't what you would think. It's that conundrum. How do you bridge that gap? Well, if there's more rules, I have inherently less freedom to do different things. But I like playing with some of the cultural tensions.
Yeah. Yeah. And mixing and matching and putting them together in ways that bring out tension. And yeah, I mean, I think there's some of that tension you're talking about in our society in North America at this point. I feel like is, we're a liberal society, and by that I think it's liberal and conservative have become not super helpful, because it's basically just, I've started calling the two camps liberal, and conservative liberal, just to clarify, like, we're all liberals, like in the United States, we're all liberals. We just have different ideas about how to accomplish liberalism. But then going back to like what you were talking about, so there's the value of the community and the value of the individual. And so part of liberalism, right, is dealing with this balance of like, so how much am I going to go into the rights and freedoms of the individual? How much does that take away from, the rights of the group or the community? And overall, right, we've decided since the founding of this country and ever since that we're going to be more on the side of the individual. And those individual freedoms and rights are kind of what defines a liberal belief system, nation, and that's what we are. But there's just some that have a conservative way of being liberal and some that have a liberal way of being liberal. But like now it's almost, we've gone so far, it feels like we're looping, that like these things aren't on a straight line spectrum, they're on a circle somehow.
Yep.
And so it's confusing to me that, you get so liberal that it's almost, it becomes illiberal, And so there's an identity crisis of, this idea that my rights are going to this place that's so far to the extreme that it infringes on everyone else's rights. And so then we're no longer liberal. We're only liberal for me and illiberal for everyone else. Like, it comes to this totally unsustainable, sort of ludicrous reality.
Yeah. It's a brain tease to think about. It's simultaneously like the further, and I hate the terms, I'm not saying left and right as like Republican, Democrat, just as a line segment. It's like the further you get apart from each other, you have this dynamic. The more left you go, the further you are from the person going right. But at the same time, somehow it's looped back in on itself, and you're getting closer and closer.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not a political scientist, and I've tried to like study the little the loop theory or whatever, and it's beyond me still. I haven't spent enough time in that land, but yeah, we're in a crisis state for sure.
Yeah. They're going back to some of the writing, like you really like delving into apocalypse. There was a fantasy series that kind of did post-apocalyptic. I believe it was something Shannara, but there's a bunch of different books there. So it takes the premise of like hundreds of years ago, there was the Industrial Revolution, all the science, that goes away. And now you're back to magic and everybody's rebuilding kind of up that. So it's almost like you're set in Middle Earth, like Lord of the Rings or something, but there was an industrial past. And there's interesting tensions because now there's magic users, but there's also science users that appear to be magic users.
Right.
And I enjoyed some of that tension and dynamic because there's still then war and strife following some of the apocalypse. That I think there's interesting crossovers between the apocalypse and the fantasy genres.
Yeah.
Both can push a person's character into extreme places.
For sure. That's another one of those things that I've never understood to be opposing to each other. Magic and science. I'm like, so why do we have to choose? That doesn't make any sense to me. But that's another thing we can, play around with in fantasy and science fiction. I mean, I tend to go down the science fiction path a little bit more than the epic fantasy path, but all the same concepts. You know, you go far enough into the future, right? You know, you're dealing with these societies that like, it really just depends on whether they want to label it science or label it magic. But to me, it's all coming from the same source.
Yep.
So,
what comes to my mind is Star Trek. It doesn't matter what you're looking at. You go far enough back in history, I'm sure guns would look completely like magic back when you only had slings.
Right.
You look at Star Trek, I'm sure someone appearing from a transporter looks completely like magic, but
right.
You go far enough down, I don't see the difference between science and magic. I don't see, like, science is just studying and explaining things. You're getting to the how it works. So I don't understand how science is at odds with anything. With religion, I've never understood that. Science, you explore, and the whole purpose is try and disprove so that you get closer and closer to explaining something. The one difference I see in science and, say, religion is science has no morals. It's just, it is what it is.
Right.
You get closer and closer to explaining something more accurately, but you're never quite there.
Yeah. Yeah, and if they, stay in their lane, then science doesn't try to tell you what to think about it. They're just telling you this is, the perception of what's happening.
Yep. They can tell you this is what's going to happen if you do this. This is what's going to happen if you do this. It's not going to tell you morally you should do this or you should do this. Yeah. Just what will happen if you do in each case.
Now, if you do this and it goes into someone's chest and they die, then it's the realm of something else to say maybe that's a bad thing or,
yes.
Yeah, but I mean, if, I pray for something to happen and it happens, I don't understand why there's a lot of people that aren't okay with calling that magic, I mean, that's pretty magical to me, like if I, the stories of Jesus multiplying bread and fish, like that's magic.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm sure that there's like also some scientific explanation for how that magic happened.
Yeah.
Maybe I wouldn't be able to duplicate it. But, maybe I could. And so...
There's something that comes to mind. When I was a kid, I got my mom an archaeological study Bible. And so you think of the story of Jericho, and it's kind of magical that you can march around a city and the walls just fall.
Then you all scream and you blow some trumpets. And was there some scientific, resonance that caused the wall? Maybe.
There was.
It's still magical.
Yep.
That's, why can there not be those two things that coexist?
Yep. You delve into it, and there was, I forget the terms for it, but it's stacking resonances that just amplify each other.
Right.
Wave amplification of sound. Or there's a complete scientific explanation, but it doesn't matter even if you have the explanation. It's still pretty magical that, hey, I can walk around something, blow some trumpets, and the walls just
or
crash.
Another fun one from kind of the same general territory in scripture, the story, now I'm going to forget, was this, did this come after the fleece? The story of when they surround, first they has to separate his troops by seeing which ones drink water from dogs from the water, and which ones drink scoop it up to their face, and then they have their jars with the torches in them, and they all sneak around the camp and line up and then scream and break their jars, and it's like this. As a result, the Philistine camp is thrown into so much disarray that they all start attacking each other and freaking out, and they feel like everybody is in the camp, and the voices echo. Or it's been a while since I've gone back and read this story, but the last time I was reading it, it just struck me as so this isn't, I guess, technically what we would call magic, but it's still just without a single sword blow, it's just this hey, why don't we do this and use jars and scream and, and have torches and it'll work fine, right? Being able to do something that,
sounds completely absurd.
succeeds despite being completely absurd. I think that was Gideon I think that was a story that came after Gideon's fleece and then led anyway, totally bizarre, totally who, coming up with this idea, let's do this, can be, that crossover between magic, science, faith, but the point was that God said, do this. And however that idea was picked up on, someone was like, okay, I think this is what God wants us to do, even though it seems stupid, and did it, and it worked. And yeah. So, that's all stuff that can be played around with, in fiction and storytelling. I mean, that's in the project I'm working on now. This is where stuff kind of bridges into that realm of what makes someone, in the old days we would say crazy, in the new days we say mentally divergent, and what just makes them attuned to something that the rest of us aren't.
Yeah.
And so who's to say that the kid that sees what the rest of us would say, oh, that's just your imagination. So that's the sort of central tenet of this project is well, what makes imagination, what makes us tempted to think it's not real, right? That expression, oh, it's just your imagination. It's intended to say what we're trying to convey is like, that's not real. And yet, imagination, just because I imagine something doesn't mean it's not real.
Yep.
Right? Like, I can imagine something quite real. You know, like I could close my eyes right now and imagine your face and imagine your beard. And like, just because I'm imagining it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And so the imagination is a tool that we utilize all the time to help us navigate reality.
Yep.
So I just became really curious about like, why are we always trying to dismiss things as just your imagination? You know, like if someone claims they hear something that other people don't hear, it's not real. You know, someone sees something that other people don't see, not real. It's your imagination. And yet, like, well, my imagination is a gift, I believe,
Yeah.
from the God who created me. And so, like, if I imagine something, what's to say that that's not real? Maybe more real
Yeah.
than, you know, what I'm looking at, you know, or hearing, or, you know, I have these 5 senses that most of us accept commonly as, you know, I guess they're the 5 senses of the material realm. But I'm more and more coming of the belief that I have a lot of other senses
Yep.
than just those 5. And I don't even know how to use most of them.
I don't think any of us do.
But it's a fun ride. You know, like I've read some things where it's like, okay, this person I genuinely think has use of another sense that I don't. And that's kind of cool, you know, and in a lot of ways I'm starting to, you know, believe or understand that prayer is an ability to use other senses. And beyond the 5 that can, you know, sense the material realm. So yeah, this project I'm working on now just deals with a kid that most people would call divergent, you know, mentally divergent. On the, you know, I don't use the terminology in the book anywhere of autism, but I mean, I think most people would recognize him probably as being autistic in some way or another. And he experiences people's dissonance between what they are and what they wish they were in the form of almost like a mental static. And so being around other people is painful for him, except he begins to discover that there's a town drunk that he doesn't mind being around because he's drunk most of the time. So there's very little static there. And so he starts to find certain individuals that he can tolerate being around more than others. And then, you know, the whole shtick of the story is that he eventually meets this one kind of traveling hobo, this homeless guy that's kind of a cast-off from a work camp that was there on the border wall, that doesn't have any static. No static at all. And so this kid's just like automatically, right, drawn in. And in addition to the static, like the kid is beginning to understand, like he sees these things that he calls the builders, that he learns has kind of been in the family. You know, his grandfather saw these things in Vietnam, and it eventually drove him crazy. But they were destroyers. They were not builders. And so I play around some essentially with the idea that these are the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. You know, they're the 4 angels of the 4 points of the compass. But it all really just depends on what you're feeding into them as to what you're seeing out of them. And so the kid doesn't have any understanding of war. You know, he has grown up in a peaceful setting, and to him, they're builders. But to people that have come out of tremendous violence and destruction, the same things that we're building are tearing everything down. And so wrestling around again with like, so are they just taking orders from us? Like, I mean, if we were to understand these things as angels, do angels, humans seem to have some sort of autonomy and assignment that angels don't. Are humans given creativity in a way that some other beings aren't? When I read Genesis, I read that the thing that makes us us is creativity. The image of God that was placed in us, right, was the ability to share in this kind of creative endeavor with the Creator. Like we're supposed to be partnering. We're supposed to be taking, that's how I understand the role that we were given. We're to be these creative partners. And yet, what are these other beings then? If we have a worldview that believes in other sorts of divine entities that aren't people, what differentiates us from them? And so, I enjoy playing around with this idea that, well, perhaps they're just taking orders from us. And if our thoughts are nothing but chaos, well, they become chaotic. If our thoughts are ordered and constructive and extending creation, then perhaps they become tools of creation.
Yeah.
That empower us in our purpose. And, this is admittedly, I'm taking things that I feel like are a little easier to know and understand from, my religious, cultural upbringing, and then applying, fictional speculation.
Yeah.
Into just like, okay, I believe that there are these beings and they're represented in different ways throughout Scripture, sometimes really gnarly, right? Like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, not super cool, right? Death and destruction and infirmity and disease, but are they essentially still just the same beings, just sent on a different purpose? How do I reconcile all of that? So yeah, that's, I've been enjoying recently playing with that.
That's a fun way to play around. I think Frank Peretti plays on that a little bit, where the angels only have as much power as the people praying. If nobody's praying, they don't have the power to protect you. It's not quite to the same level where it's like one being. Is it acting
right
like as an angel or acting as a demon?
My prayers will give you violence versus my prayers will give you love and creation or destruction.
Yeah. But I enjoyed, I haven't read those since I was a kid, I don't think.
I did read some of Peretti's stuff, but that was in like the late 80s. So I haven't read any of that since then. The Thief in the Night, is that, or am I in the wrong series?
I don't know. The ones I remember were This Present Darkness.
Oh, This Present Darkness, yeah.
Piercing the Darkness, The Oath.
Yeah, the Switchblade and whatever. I think that was not Peretti. The Cross and the Switchblade. Those, I think, were actually before Peretti. I'm going to forget the name of the author, but I very much grew up, steeped in that world. That was kind of my conversion moment. Was traumatic for me. What was I think actually, so as the Cross and the Switch, am I thinking of the name of that movie series? There was a movie, and I was probably like 6. I have no idea why my parents thought this would be a good idea for me. The Thief in the Night. Yeah, I think that's the name of the movie. But it's the classic, like, along the lines of the Left Behind series and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Now I'm forgetting the theological dispensationalism. Yeah. All this kind of very common in recent history, the dispensationalist take on the end times. But yeah, the movie was all, guillotines and the beast and 666 and everyone getting, like the opening scene is that classic scene of, everyone being, like all the good people being raptured, and cars like driving off the road because no one was driving them anymore. And like the electric razor in the sink, because the person that was using it to shave got raptured. And, I saw that movie and I was like a 6-year-old. I was like, I don't want to be left behind. Oh, please, God. And then like 3 weeks later or a month later, the funniest, like this is hilarious story, but of course, Sunday morning, getting ready for church, and in my parents' bedroom had a walk-in, it was a master suite, so it had like a bathroom attached to it and a walk-in closet attached to it. And for whatever reason, my dad had gone into the bathroom and started shaving, and I don't know why he didn't turn the razor off. He has an electric razor, left it sitting on the counter on, and went into the closet to get something. And so this is after I've been, totally traumatized by this movie, and I bop in to ask some question, and I get into the bathroom and the razor is like sitting there on, and I'm like, oh God, no, like my dad's been raptured and I've been left behind. Like I start screaming, and like he comes back in from the other, the closet, comes back around into the bathroom, and like bumps into me as I'm trying to run out. I'm screaming and crying, and he's like, what in God's name? And I like, he's still there. I'm like, I just ran off. But like, that was like one of my early memories of the immediate aftermath of my conversion story. Still just this panic that I'm going to be left behind. I'm not good enough. So I don't know, maybe not the best execution for trying to, maybe wasn't the best like evangelistic idea there to terrify people into the kingdom by making them think they were going to be left behind. But yeah, that's the era that I come out of.
Yep. I don't think I ever watched that one, but I do remember reading both the adult series and the children's series of Left Behind, because we didn't read a lot of secular stuff. Mom was pretty strict about what we were allowed to read, but yeah, the Left Behind series, I remember many a time having different thoughts or scares like that.
I read the first couple. I think I was old enough by that time to be like, yeah, these are entertaining stories, but like, this is not how I think it's going to go down.
Yeah.
I was already starting to foment some of my own thoughts about that.
Yeah.
So
there was another series that took a very weird turn for me. I cannot for the life of me remember what it was. But it took the approach that angels were real and they did have relations with humans, and that's how we ended with the Nephilim. And what the Nephilim really were the giants. So Goliath was a descendant of one of the giants.
Mm-hmm. Which I think is a pretty commonly held understanding.
But it took another thing where it took the approach that the rapture isn't going to happen as we think of it, like in the Left Behind sense. That prophecy is always told as something that's happened, but something that's going to happen again. It's kind of like a circle that kind of fulfills. And so it talks about like Nero Caesar. If you look at the Hebraic numbering, came out to 666 and different concepts like that. And it blended a lot of this stuff in a really interesting way. And I've always wanted to go back and see if I can figure out what that series was and reread it. But it was written in a more fantasy sense.
Yeah. No, I'm not familiar with that specific series, but some of those concepts, for sure.
Yeah. So going back to some of the stuff you're writing or have written, do you have many different series just playing through your mind of things that you want to write, or is it all kind of condensed into a singular world that you focus on as you write?
Well, I have a bad habit of trying to fit a whole bunch of stuff into one world. I think maybe I've broken myself with that habit now. But that, for a long while, was my temptation. I'd have a new story idea, and I'd be like, "Oh, how can I fit this in the same world as this other thing? Like, I'll just put it back in time a little bit, or I'll, move it to this other planet or whatever, and it'll be fine." But I think hopefully I'm getting out of that. Sometimes a story, I think, just needs to be its own thing. I know commercially there's that temptation to like, oh, I can make this all connected. Then I'll have a head start on trying to sell more copies of it. But yeah, I think I've been sort of on the bench for a while. I've been working on one project actively, and with a few others on the back burner. But typically, and over the next few years, maybe I'll get back into this pattern where I would have at least 2 or 3 different worlds, sort of on the stove at least, to where there'd be one that I'm working on as far as like actively writing a rough draft, and then maybe another one that's cooling on the windowsill a little bit, and then another one that is just in the sort of mixing the pot mode, where occasionally an idea will come to me and I'll make some notes, or I'll look something up and write some things down, put some stuff in my kind of like file folder, and let those brew long enough to
kind
where
of a mixing pot of ideas.
Yeah, and if at some point stuff starts boiling over, where I'm like, okay, I just got to start this next, and then I'll kind of actively start writing on it, and I'll put the other one on the sill for a little while to cool, and then take turns coming back to it, and then doing a rewrite there, and while actively working on. And that's kind of how I like to be able to do it. That way it stays interesting for me. One might be dystopian, and one might be, space opera, or, space marines, or, so I can kind of jump back and forth. Recently, it's been getting more back to that boiling over point with just multiple ideas, because I haven't done a ton of writing for the last 4 or 5 years. And so, yeah, now I have so many ideas that I want to write next. It's an active competition between them to kind of, the one project I'm on now, I'm entering, it's been cooling a little bit, and I'm entering into kind of this 3rd, 4th, 5th rewrite phase, to where, I don't know, within the next few months, it could potentially be ready to go. And so I have started like actively having trials, for the others, like, convince me which of you should be next. But yeah, nobody has been declared the winner yet.
How do you test them out against each other?
They just have to make their pitch. Which one can appeal to me the most. I think the finalist right now would be an artificial intelligence near future world. And then that one, where the AI, it's basically a story about, like, would be reflecting on an AI is really only who teaches it. And so the idea would be like, are we okay with the people that are training our AIs right now? Like, it's like this doesn't seem great to me. Like an AI is really only going to be like what it learns and who's teaching it what to learn. So should we maybe be more concerned about who's training the AIs? So it's that kind of idea, of like an AI that is sort of intentionally by its creator made to be set free and to learn, but he thinks he's given it parameters to keep it safe and yet allow it to grow in a, what he is hoping is an ideal way. That one's competing closely with a kind of a quantum computing near future science fiction story where the main character decides to mix mycelial networks with quantum computing. So that one's going to require a lot more research for me, because those are both areas that I don't have enough knowledge on to make something at all feasible, but I'm interested. And so how could like a natural biological network by chance enhance and maybe correct some of the failings in our current, attempts at quantum computing? And in that one, I think there's actually going to be the birth of like a fungal sentient race of beings that are like fungus but aware. That one might be geared toward maybe even a younger adult audience. I'm not sure. But then the third competitor would be a post-apocalyptic. Well, so the some of the characters would be in the post-apocalypse and some of them would be in the pre-apocalypse. And both would be young adults, but have found through kind of some kind of quantum entanglement a thin space that allows the communication, very limited communication back and forth from the future to the past and the past to the future. And I think the form the communication is going to take is Pokemon cards, just because that's where my kids, my oldest son is like totally into the TCG right now, Pokemon game. So I'm toying around with the idea of like a kid in the future finding this bombed out remains of like essentially a wealthy mansion where a guy had his, little climate sealed chamber with some wine bottles and his Pokemon card collection and everything. So the kid finds these cards and he's super fascinated with them, but starts making his own and adding things into them. And then these kids in the past start finding these hidden weird Easter egg Pokemon cards that are like not anything like anything else. And they think it's coming from Pokemon, but in the end, they're going to find out that like these kids in the future are making them. And then, I'll have the crazy uncle or whatever from the future that's been studying climate trends and, it's like, oh, we need to like send back like these key moments when things went wrong, and climate disaster, like encode them into the cards and help them find these coordinates and change this thing. So it'll be that kind of deal, maybe where the kids in the past are able to like change small things that then, make big repercussions in the future.
Yeah.
Those three are all competing right now.
Nice. I have to say the first two stood out the strongest to me. I'm a programmer, so AI kind of jumps out at me as fun.
Yeah.
But then I have to say the second one might be the fungus one, to use a bad pun.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious about it. I've been reading another one of the books that I'm reading through, haven't quite finished, is called, I think the title of it is The Mother Tree. But it's that, study of mycelial networks and just sort of like what science is just now learning in a lot of ways, that like so many different species of widely different, plants are actually networked to each other, under the ground, through the soil, through these fungal connections, and they're sharing different resources and, nutrients and stuff back and forth with each other in ways that we 50 years ago were completely clueless about. So I find that really interesting. And of course, just the whole idea of connectedness and creation. And again, that idea of something that would have seemed like magic 60, 70 years ago, there's no way that this mushroom and that tree or this tree and that tree or this plant and that whatever, are sharing nutrients with each other. That's, hogwash. But now we're finding is a scientific explanation, or we don't have an explanation, but we're deducing that it's happening. We don't necessarily know how or why, but it's happening. And so that's another one of those areas where, fungus and then, quantum, mechanics and stuff is another one of those areas that's okay, this is magic. Are you joking with me? This is definitely magic. We don't have any understanding of how this is working at all. But it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Two things come to mind. One, the movie Avatar, of course, that's full of the networks. But then talking about quantum being magic, it's been a law of science for forever. You can't travel faster than the speed of light, but you look at quantum entanglement and it's instantaneous over any distance.
Yeah.
You look at the speed of gravity travels faster than light. You see effects.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
The Marvel universe right now is pretty much the apex of my knowledge of quantum mechanics. So my understanding is pretty elementary. I can't go much further past Ant-Man and Doctor Strange at the moment, but it is something that I find extremely interesting, and something really fun to play in and play with.
Well, an interesting thing just came to my mind. You were talking about, is our imagination real? But then a fact of quantum physics, you look at wave-particle duality, and it's a wave. It doesn't exist at any one spot until it's observed, and then it ceases to be a wave. Now it's just here. You have this wave-particle duality. So then I'm thinking of, is anything around us, you go back to, if a tree falls in the forest but it wasn't heard, was it real? You go back to then the imagination. I'm imagining some sort of character that's whatever they imagine then comes into reality, because then they're linked in some way quantumly that they're now observing something that wasn't there, and so it just becomes real.
Right. If I pray something into existence, isn't that didn't I just imagine something into reality? I know people who have prayed people back to life who were dead. How's that not magic? You're taking something that was not alive and reanimating it. I don't know the difference between prayer and imagination at the moment. I don't know how to define those as separate entities. So I guess I don't need to. I'm just gonna. I'm a fiction author, so I don't have to understand these things.
Just have fun with it.
But I can play around with well, what if these things were the same thing? What would that do to you? What would that mean? What would that do to me? Yeah.
That's a lot of fun. One of those, I know you're working on possibly a game.
Yeah.
Does that lead you toward writing more on one of them, or make you want to do one on one but then write on the other?
Yeah, the fungal fictional universe has stemmed out of the game concept that my youngest son and I have been working on for, I think we decided 7 years, 7 or 8 years. We've been toying around with this game concept, which has taken several different forms. But yeah, the backstory that we've slowly kind of developed for it has been this fungal world. And so, yeah, that's a motivator. That's a point on that world's scoreboard, for doing that one, because it would be fun. My son could be a little bit more involved in it as well, coming up with character names and concept names and ideas. I bounce things off of him some too, where if you're inventing not only like an entire fictional species, but one that I'm having a hard time even imagining, so you're fungal, but sentient. Okay. Small, but we're thinking still not microscopic. So, but small. But figuring out what are these how do they perceive the world? What's their orientation to the world even? Playing around with the idea right now that they are actually upside down to us, and that the threshold between air and ground is the spot where that perspective switches. So if you're standing on the ground, I would be standing on, their head would be what I would consider be down. And, to them, my head would be down. And so if they fall from a blade of grass, they're going to fall into oblivion. So for them, up is going further into the dirt, and down would be this chasm, that to me is the world I live in.
Yeah.
And so playing with stuff like that, just okay, let's build out this world. How do they move around? What do they move in? What do they look like? So far, we've arrived at they're kind of like a combination between a nerd, like the candy nerds, these little globular things, but have hands and fingers of some sort, dexterity. But yeah, it's been a bit of a weird process to creating this entirely, sometimes hard to fathom fictional species.
Since you were talking about Pokemon, what comes to mind is Ditto.
Yeah, this little globular. Yeah.
I know you have a different style of writing than I had encountered before on serials. How do you write in that format? Because I'm only familiar with you don't publish until you have a final finished product. How did you come to serials? And if I remember right, you had a business that you had started around that.
Yeah, serial fiction. It's had its ups and downs, and there's a bit of a moment going on for it now. I mean, this hasn't been historically the only time we've done serial fiction. I think probably the most famous example would be something like Dickens. And there was a time, like The Christmas Carol was released as serial fiction in the newspaper. And so we've had different mediums in the past that have been a little bit more conducive to things to be released serially. The Green Mile was released serially. There's been a few examples. And there have been different experiments over the last 15 years. Amazon had its own serial platform that has not succeeded. And most of these experiments haven't succeeded as well as I had kind of, if you would have asked me like 8 years ago, I'd have been like, oh yeah, man, this is going to blow up. The idea is just based on the way that we like to consume television, and television, right, is the dominating media of our age. And yeah, it's sort of shifted a little bit to streaming content, but it's still essentially, television and that kind of visual video content has been the transition from the media and the age of the book. And so we've entered now a new age. And, this Postman, right, the amusing ourselves to death, Tull was talking about this in the 80s. And he was way ahead of his time. I think it took most of us 20 more years to really realize what was going on. But yeah, we've switched to this kind of visual medium, and the kind of comfortable version of storytelling that emerged as we practiced that expression was the serial. We have seasons, we have shows that, are released a show at a time and a season at a time. And so it's really, serial fiction is just based around a lot of the aspects of how television, the best television that we experience now, series are composed. And I find it really fun, more so than writing like a series of, 300-page long books. I can engage in a serial world where each episodic story is, maybe 10,000 words or something that the typical reader could read in 30 minutes or 40 minutes. Kind of, again, that same span of attention, to where, in this particular episode, it's structured similarly, that might be dominated by one character's backstory, and the next episode might go into a different character's backstory. Or, if it's kind of a procedural style, like CSI or something, right, then, you have an episode that's one case that's, then kind of resolved, and there's another case that opens. And, of course, arcing through, many episodes, you would have the story arc of the main character's background, that continually shows up, or a romantic relationship that pops up in every episode. And so whether you're writing something that would be more like Lost, or, some of these television shows that are flashing all around, maybe not necessarily linear, or you've got a procedural, that's something more like CSI, or you've got one that's very much just following, a kind of linear story arc. But you have to tune into each episode, or you're going to miss a piece. The fiction, same as television, it can take any of those different styles. But yeah, that's if you put 6, 7, 8, 10, 10,000 word episodes together, then you've got a season.
Yep.
So some of it is just using different terminology. Instead of calling a book series, you're calling it a season. But mainly it's just you're structuring them shorter, and then using those kind of the story arcs that we've been perfecting in television, of having kind of a overarching arch for the entire series, an arch that might be within a season, and then, individual arches for each episode. But the idea would be that there would need to be some sort of resolution at the end of an episode, even if it's a cliffhanger episode. Like, you're going to bring something to resolution, even if it's just that they discovered that the bad guy they just killed was working for another bad guy, like they'll be, or they unlocked the room that they were trying to get in just to find that it wasn't the room that they were actually, the thing they were looking for wasn't there.
Each thing is more of its own standalone while progressing the whole.
And so we're often like a chapter, we wouldn't define as something that has some sort of resolution necessarily at the end of it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it could be that they're just changing location to another location and we just make a chapter break. Where an end of an episode would be a little bit more intentional of like, okay, I've been intentionally trying to weave some sort of narrative arc here, where there's a beginning and a middle and an end, and I'm being intentional and mindful. And it might be a teaser, or a cliffhanger, but, I'm being very intentional about where I'm drawing the end of this episode, as opposed to, an 8-page chapter that's just kind of like, well, he went to bed, so I'll just start the next chapter in the morning, or whatever. So a little bit of different mentality as far as the structure. And then, we were dabbling around with the idea that you could write these episodes and publish them before you're done with the series or the season even. And so you're, getting reader feedback on like what should happen next and stuff like that. But that, that's not implicit in serial fiction. You could finish the entire thing and then release it serially. You don't have to be, writing it and releasing it as you go. Although I enjoy doing that sometimes too.
I think I would struggle doing that as an author. I have personally liked the bigger the book, the more I've enjoyed it. Like I want to completely immerse myself in it. And I would have a hard time, I think, with the episodic. It's like, how do you keep everything consistent?
Right.
How do you not have random episodes that just break something a little? Like I want internal cohesion. I think that's going to be one of my struggles when I go to write is I'm not going to want to publish any one book until I finish the series so that I can go back and make sure everything plays with each other.
Yeah.
Which I know is also not super realistic.
It's hard. It's a give and take either way. Because I've definitely published a series and then I get to publishing book 5 and I go back and look at book 1 and I'm just like, if I were to publish this now, it'd be so much better, And so there's that tension of like, well, sometimes you just got to publish and you just got to go. But at the same time, like, oh, man, like, I would have done this different if I were doing it now.
Yep. There's 2 things that come to mind. One is the phrase like perfection is the enemy of progress. At some point, you just got to go. And that goes to the Pareto distribution. It's like, every time you publish, you're that much more likely to publish more. And the expertise will get there, but you got to take that first step.
Yeah. That's where I do fall now. Like if someone's asking me for this advice, then I'm like, well, if you have a baby, don't start with the baby. Like if you have something that you just really like, find something else, find a one-off, or come up with a different series and, at least get in, more practice before you decide to do the one big thing that you have been building toward for 20 years or whatever. Because you definitely, that would be more painful, to get 3-4 books into that series and be like, okay, I got to just start over.
My brainchild is ruined.
Yeah. Maybe a compromise there would be like, well, you got to start somewhere, but just start with something that is maybe not that thing that you've been trying to envision for half your life.
I'll have to take that advice because what I had started writing on has actually been something I've been toying with for, I don't know, in different forms. Like the final version I have kind of in my mind right now has only been around maybe 2 years, but I've been playing around with this idea for maybe as much as 10 or 15 years. in some different fashion.
Yeah. But I mean, you're doing this at least, and that's experience too.
That was part of the idea of the show too. It
Right.
wasn't just I want to hear other people's stories, but also I'm very much of the opinion reading and speaking to others are how you sharpen your ability to think, how I can test my ideas out or learn to think more coherently or from different angles.
Yeah.
So part of this is actually to sharpen myself as a speaker, as a thinker, as a writer in every fashion. So it was like, okay, let's get that first episode out. I had the idea, and within a month, it's from having the idea of doing the podcast to recording the first episode was just under a month.
Yeah.
Or right at a month. I forget the exact dates. I think it was July 10th I had the idea for it, and I forget when I recorded the first episode.
Yeah, I mean, it's evidence that we're never truly starting from ground zero. No. You know, like, I don't believe in the blank page. You know, I mean, I know, like staring at a blank page might be harder than if there was something written there that you were picking up on, but I don't know. To me, that's not made sense, you know, because you're never starting from a blank page. Like, you know, our experiences, our conversations, you know, the things that we've written in the past, spoken in the past, stories that we've told and that have been told to us, you know, I mean, it's all, and so in the sense that it's all there and we're just kind of plucking it out and putting it on the page. And so maybe there's that sense of just like you were saying, the apprehension of starting in the wrong place prevents us from starting. But yeah, I guess I like the page isn't blank. And so it doesn't really matter. I can just start throwing stuff onto it. And then I can go back and decide later for this particular story where it needs to start. You know? But yeah, the one story ends and, you know, another story has already begun. It's just a matter of, and that's why writing in series is a thing, you know? Because even when we end one story, like the moment we stop typing, we know there's another story there that we've already started that we could tell if we want to, or you know, like, because, it's never a total ending.
There's always infinite ways you can take stuff. You can add side stories for different characters. You can do, what was the history before this?
Yeah.
What happened after? Like, you can take it in 20 different directions.
Yeah, I think series end just ultimately because at some point the author is just tired. Like, I don't want to write this anymore. So it's over. But
I've been a little fascinated with some authors that decide before they start, this is exactly how many books this series is going to be. Like Brandon Sanderson, I believe, said the Stormlight Archive will be 10 books. And in my mind, it's like, what if you get to the end and you haven't captured everything you wanted? Do you just write another? Or what if you get to book 8 and it's like, everything I had for this, I've gotten down. Now, how do I fill out 2 books of fluff?
Fake my way through 2 more books. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but I don't know if I would be able to plan thoroughly enough to pull that off. I know some people definitely could. They would be able to sort of at least have enough of a map in their mind to know, like, I know what these 10 books are going to be, and like, this is where it's going to end.
I challenged myself to do that a bit with the series I was mentioning I want to write. It's like, okay, let's say I want to do 10 books. I want to make them, I don't know, 400,000 words like Sanderson did with his on average per book. So the only way I know to do this is let me first write at a very high level. What's my beginning? What's my end? Now let's add details in the middle of that to make each have that much.
Yeah.
Whether it's adding more world building, instead of having one main character, you go the larger one like Robert Jordan did, and you have more 10 to 20 main characters. Yeah. Or that was the only way I could think to even approach that. And I know there's no one approach to anything, but that was the only way I could comprehend how could I do this if I wanted to do that.
Yeah, I'm a little too discovery writing based. That would be, the planning would be painful for me. I mean, I guess I'm not a complete pantser in the sense, flying by my pants, that I won't have some idea. But I'm a little bit more toward that exploratory side of, being what people would call a discovery-based writer, where I don't know, I never know everything. And some stories I know how I want it to end. I don't know how I'm going to get there. Some I have a sense of where I want to begin, but I'm not sure where I want to end. Some I just have a character that's very vivid to me, and that's where it starts. And I do, like, another one of my heroes is Joss Whedon, as far as a storyteller. And the things that I value and appreciate about his storytelling is the ability to kill characters. And like, I value anyway the knowing when to kill a character and being okay with killing a main character. Because, if you kill a tertiary character that nobody cares about, that doesn't,
big deal.
That doesn't do anything, And I've definitely, the Reefer Ranger was one that like almost broke my heart, because like I was writing in the middle of a story and like he was just killed like in front of me. Like I wrote it really before I knew what I was writing. Like he just like, he was on a butte riding his horse, and like just from a, like the bullet goes through him and he falls off his horse, and then hears the repercussions, sound of the bullet, like comes from far enough away that he's like, okay, I don't even know who just killed me, And so like, I kind of got up from the keyboard and was like, what the bleep? Like I just killed my favorite character. Like, I couldn't. I sat with it, and like there was a part of me that was like, okay, I just killed my favorite character, and I was like, no, I got to write my way out of this. Like,
can't do it.
I couldn't do it. Like, not now, not him. And so, I wrote him back to life. That he ultimately, it was a close call, but But yeah, that's part of, I guess, discovery writing is like sometimes things just happen. And I value the ability to be like, okay, man, I've had some characters that I really enjoyed, building them and developing them, but I just, like this is just the time when they got to go, and just saying goodbye to them and knowing that I can come up with another one. It's fine. But
I don't know that I could kill my main characters off. I think I'm way too early in learning to write. There's so much. I have to have a general big picture. And so I invest so much into every aspect. It's like I wouldn't know where to start to build a new character. Like you said, the page isn't empty, or blank, But that's about how I would feel. It's completely starting from scratch. It's like I wouldn't even know where to start.
Yeah. Well, it's like a funeral, it's just, it's not comfortable. I mean, it's sad. I mean, it'd be interesting to ask Whedon, like, Wash, I think, would probably be the most famous example for anyone that's a Firefly, a brown coat fan. The pilot, beloved, one of the main characters, and he just kills him off. And, you're just like, what? It's, but done so well, like where it takes you right up to the line where you're like, I'm done with this. And then like 5 minutes later, no, I'm not done with this. But like that rage of like, I can't believe this character is dead. But yeah, it's that I value that fine line, of being able to, like, number one, create a character that a reader is going to care a lot about. And then number two, be willing to, like, kill them.
I feel like in some ways that is easier in the serials than some of the long form, deeper books. What comes to mind is back to the TV shows, like you mentioned, where it just becomes a necessity. This actor says, yeah, I'm not coming back next season. You're going to have to write your way out of it.
Right. But well, like if you're, you're writing The Hobbit or something, like you can't kill Bilbo. Like no. That destroys the story. But, there can be important characters along the way, that ones that you become really attached to.
I think Tolkien would also challenge that because he killed Gandalf off.
Yeah.
Just to bring him back.
Yeah.
But, yeah. I had another angle that my mind was going with that, and it's just gone. Oh, the serials. I was going back to, like, TV. It'd be like, in my mind, it would be like on House, killing House off. Like, how do you have the TV show House without House?
Yeah, no, you wouldn't kill him. But, I mean, another TV show that I thought did this pretty well was 24. I mean, it's an old one. Mm-hmm. But they were ruthless. Like the main department of, like, the head guy, I mean, of course, not Jack, not the main guy, but like his partner,
yep,
or like his supervisor, people that you thought were definitely in the show for a while, and I mean, it's been so long since I've seen the show, but there was the, like, nerdy coder guy, and there's the episode where, like, the office, like this contained, sealed office, like somehow, like, someone gasses them all out and they're all locked in, and you're like watching, like, two of, like, your favorite, I think it was Chloe and, like, I'm trying to remember their names, and, like, they just die, gassed to death, and the whole time you're thinking, okay, like, someone's gonna bust it open, they're gonna save them, like, at the last minute, right? Like, Jack will thwart them, like, and
it's the cliffhanger that never happens.
Good guys lose. And yeah, I mean, but you have to know in some stories that, like, that's possible.
Yep.
Or otherwise the whole time you're just like, whatever. These guys are fine. They're not, but the moment that, like, anyone except Jack is fair game, like, it dials the show up to a whole different level, because every episode you're like, dude, like, basically anyone but this one guy could die at any moment, like sniper bullet to the brain or, like, poison gas.
Yep. I mean, NCIS had that happen. One of their special agents, just sniper, took out on the rooftop, and then all of a sudden, oh, by the way, we're replacing. Now you have Ziva.
Yeah, I mean, as a storyteller, sometimes I feel like if you're not willing to do that, and again, it depends on what you're writing, right? I mean, if you're writing a cozy mystery and, you want people to be relaxed the entire time.
You don't start killing all the characters.
You don't want them to be like, oh, God, But if you're writing a thriller, like you have to be willing to, prove to the reader, like, oh, okay, like literally, like almost anything can happen. Otherwise, there's not the same thrill.
Yeah.
And so,
I guess taking us back a little further, you had started a business around writing. Was that around serials?
yeah. So the whole platform was based on a collaborative platform where multiple authors are working in the same world, generating content rapidly enough to be publishing it serially, and yet the reader is reading as if they're binging, because there's 5 different authors creating content in this world at a pace fast enough to keep up with the reader being able to read more of it every night, and so that was the idea.
Have you thought of going back and continuing that at all?
May it rest in peace. No, that company's dead, and that dream. If someone else were to do it, I mean, I'd be on board with writing. I love that writing style, collaborative writing within a shared world. And there are challenges with it, to the extent that it's like, and that's what, we were building a platform that was trying to facilitate, like, so, hey, you wrote about this world, and so like one of the shared worlds I was in was a far distant future kind of transhuman, post-human universe with a lot of different planets. And, so, I mean, we spent countless nights, me and these 4 other guys, just like pounding out like all the crazy world building, And so, I mean, number one, world building with other people, I find way more fun than world building by myself. And so we toss ideas out, and a lot of it was around dark matter, and what would happen if we were able to harness, these types of things and build essentially these worlds that were sort of scripted scenarios, not entirely like the Matrix or whatever, but, like everything on the planet was to generate this one kind of dark matter that then was essentially a designer drug for this, elevated species, that was, so if there's a planet full of like a bunch of dinosaurs just like killing everyone, like then they would imbibe the drug that would come from the planet. Primal Instinct was the name of that planet. That was just like this heart-pounding adrenaline drug, that was like formed from the very, essence of the people existing on this planet.
It's like the world's overall pheromones.
Yeah, and so, they were building these worlds and engineering worlds and terraforming things very specifically. Some of them were built to kind of like repeat the same ecological disaster kind of like over and over and over. And out of that, it would generate this kind of designer drug for the people that were imbibing it. But then, of course, like systems start to break down, the ancestral humans that were being kind of bred as chattel to fill these worlds would kind of like start to have these deja vu moments, where they're like, wait, like this seems like this happened before. But like we're just building this all out. And so it was like, okay, well, I'm going to write a Space Marine story about the people that come in basically to wipe out a planet when it goes awry. Because you're going to have at some point, right, like something messes up. So you call in the Extinction Force, to come in and like melt everything to the ground. So like, okay, well, I'm going to write this series over here, that's going to be more, space opera or cerebral or whatever, about this guy who's like an enforcer going around, or, I'm going to write about these people that are, settlers on one of the original, groups sent to terraform this one planet for a private owner. And so some of the characters would overlap, and some would, so we would ask permission, like, okay, hey, I want to use this character that you built over here. and like, but later, or earlier in the timeline. And so like, if this happens, is that cool? So, there's a lot of technicalities in kind of being able to create the platform, and, there's some challenges to collaborate with other authors.
Yeah.
But I find it to be super fun.
I far prefer collaborating. I feel that gets the creative juices flowing so much faster. It's very hard to sit and think alone and go, I don't even know where. Like, some of the best times I've taken my story forward has just been talking to different people, bouncing ideas off of it, almost like I'm pulling them into my world.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's how we typically would do it. We just join a group and we ask them and they give us some feedback, and then they ask us and we give them some feedback, and then or you can take it a whole other level and be like, well, let's just all be writing in the same world instead of on our totally different projects.
I mean, the biggest example of like the same universe is probably Star Wars or Star Trek.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many different
Right.
authors and spin-offs that are all in that same.
Yeah. That's how we would kind of explain the concept to people. Star Wars, Star Trek, Marvel, right? You've got these different stories. Sometimes a character will overlap,
Yep.
Guardians of the Galaxy, right? There's a whole bunch of different characters that come in and out of them, as they're running around. Where you might have another one that's, much more like, I'm trying to think of like a Marvel movie that doesn't really have a ton of other characters crossing over into it. But anyway.
They've found a way to blend them all at this point.
But yeah, just that's the concept. Yeah, there's a huge world of intellectual property. But yeah, lots of different people over the years have contributed to it.
Most of your work is now on Substack, right?
Substack is my hub. That's my home. A lot of it I have over the last 5 years maybe streamed there. But I mean, even just the stuff that I've kind of published episodically through my Substack is maybe, I don't know, like a tenth of it. A lot of it isn't really available anywhere right now. With the kibosh of the platform that we were doing stuff on, some of the detritus is still up and around the internet that I probably need to clean up a little bit better. And some stuff is on my Substack. And some stuff is still on Amazon, I think. But yeah, my plan is to reorganize my Substack, and kind of retool at least, I don't know, 60 or 70% of the stuff I've done. There's some of it I'll probably just abandon, but there's 2 or 3 main universes where I'd like to get everything up to a level to where I'm happy with it based on my current talent level, skill level, and restream everything on Substack. That's the plan, and kind of have that be my ongoing home, to where if someone wanted to be a paid subscriber, they could download like an EPUB or an actual ebook, but for free you could just stream it and just read it digitally. And then of course if you wanted to paperback, you could buy that. But
what do you mean by streaming? I have a couple different things coming into my mind. Is that like all the content's there, you pay monthly, and so then you now have access to all of it, like a Netflix streaming platform, but for books? Or is it more kind of like a subscription where it's like, even if I start, let's say you have 3 people and they each start streaming a week apart, do they have access to the same content, or is each one delayed by like only a certain amount is released to them over time?
By streaming content, I guess when I'm talking about the written word, I'm just referring to, it's like essentially web based. And
Okay.
and so like if you download an ebook, right, that's typically it's a file, and you're able to like download it and then read offline.
Yep.
And so that an ebook, even though you might read an ebook that you don't technically own, but you've purchased the right to read that ebook. So, IP and rights and all this stuff gets into sometimes a weird place when you're dealing with digital files, and you can find out all of a sudden that your digital files are gone, and you didn't own those digital files. You just purchased the right to temporarily read those digital files. But streaming would be one level away from that, to where you're essentially on the website on a device, typically like a phone or a tablet or whatever.
What comes to mind is essentially just a longer form of a blog.
Yeah, and so like if you're streaming content, right? If you're streaming video content, you have to have a connection to that content.
Yep.
It buffers if that connection goes away. And so that's when I guess when I say streaming written content, that's the same type of concept. Is that your Substack has a nice app, and it makes the reading environment is really clean. And whether or not you're reading like a magazine style article or journalistic content written by someone, or in my case, fiction, you're scrolling typically, and if you lose internet connection, you lose your wireless or phone reception or whatever you're using, then temporarily you wouldn't be able to read it.
Yep.
And so streaming content, that's would be in my case, I would have the streaming content available for free. And so like you wouldn't have to subscribe to my Substack. At least this is how I'm planning on doing it. You could find me on Substack, and if you wanted to just sort of stream the content, it's free. If you wanted to be able to then pay, $3 or whatever a month, then that would give you access to like, okay, I would rather just have an EPUB so that I can read it, or a Mobi or whatever, just so I can read it on my Kindle or read it,
Yeah.
This is my preferred method. I don't want to just be scrolling on my phone. I want to be able to open it up in my Kindle reading app or, whatever.
Are you going to do any print versions? Because I know some people, when they read it, they can't stand electronics. They want that paper in hand.
I still read on paper mostly. When I'm reading long form, like I prefer print books. Mm-hmm. And so that's the great thing about the evolving industry, the way things are now. It's getting easier and easier to sell print as an individual. And so that would definitely, that's part of the plan as well. And currently I'm thinking I'm not interested anymore in rankings on Amazon. I don't care, in driving up my, and playing that game and, paying for advertising dollars and trying to do Amazon blitzes and trying to drive a certain number of people to the platform within a certain amount of hours in order to drive up the rankings and then draw the attention of other Amazon readers because I'm higher on the rankings. And I really, I'm just going to sell books to people that know they want to buy my books.
Yeah.
And so I can do that from my own website. People can easily just click from Substack over to my website. And, now it's not like it used to be where, like enter all of your information and it takes like 30 minutes to sell something from your website and nobody wants to do it because they don't trust like, well, how my credit card information is going to get stolen or whatever. Now I can set it up to where someone can click over and then put their finger to their phone in Apple Pay and it's done.
Yep.
Or however If they're using Android, same thing. So, technology has come far enough to the point now to where there's not really any reason for me to sell paper books off of Amazon and give Amazon most of the money. I can use a service that will drop ship the books if I want, or send me the books and then I can send them on to the reader. But yeah.
I know way back it used to be you had to publish because they handled a lot of the marketing, everything, but it seems more and more from the little bit that I know, they don't even do the marketing for you anymore. You're just finding a publisher that maybe goes back and forth with the editor with you, but more and more you're responsible for everything anyways. So
yeah, any publisher, small, medium, or large, the more platform that the content creator has going in, the better. Yeah. Because the publishers are struggling and it's hard for them as well, because again, it's not like I go to Houghton Mifflin to buy a book. I go to Amazon, nobody goes to, Tor to, or Harlequin, these publishers have tried, right, to launch kind of like their own storefronts. But for the most part, right, I Google something and, I go to Thrift Books or I go to Amazon or I go,
go to Barnes and Noble or wherever.
Buy it online. And so, yeah, it's just the publishers are having a hard time getting eyeballs too. So they look for people that have a platform, whether you're a famous politician or an entertainer, YouTube content creator, or even just if you're a motivational speaker or, a martial arts instructor or whatever, like if you have an audience, of even 5,000 people that know who you are and would be interested in reading something that you've written, then yeah, you can approach a publisher and they'll be like, oh, okay, well, we can tell here that we could probably sell this many copies of a book based just on the audience you've already put together. But at the same time, if you already have an audience,
then you don't need.
Do you need the publisher? It just kind of depends on,
self-publish, drop ship, or
if you really are the kind of person that doesn't want to mess around with any of it on your taxes. It doesn't, you don't want to have your own website. You don't want to, you just don't want to deal with that. Then yeah, a traditional publisher might totally still be the best path for you. But for a lot of people, I think they find that oh, okay, I can do a certain amount of this myself.
Yeah.
And since I pretty much have to go find the readers anyway, most people find some sort of combination of being a hybrid published indie author or, fully independent or, whatever.
I would imagine doing some of the indie author or streaming, kind of the style of writing you're enjoying would be very similar growing that as it would be to a podcast, where maybe you're spreading your reach through kind of like the guests that you have come on. Like if you're sharing a world with a couple other authors, now you're kind of cross-pollinating your audiences with each other.
Yeah, that was part of the thinking too when we were developing this. Again, it's like, well, it's easier for 5 people to find that kind of critical 10,000, email list than it is for one. For one writer to come up with an email list of 10,000 subscribers, it's hard. That's a lot of subscribers.
Yeah.
I have an email list that I've maintained for 10 years pretty consistently, and it's 2,500 people. Now, I haven't put effort into growing it for 5 years. I've put effort into maintaining it.
Yeah.
And so I send something to that list every week. But like 10,000 is a lot. And so, but like if one person can do 2,500, then and you're joining in with 4 other people, well, then you've got 10,000.
Yep.
And now, obviously, you might end up sharing the revenues with those other 4 people too.
But it's a way to get started.
But yeah, it feels like more progress. You know, if your goal is to make a sustainable living wage as an author, you haven't gotten there necessarily faster. But if your goal is to be a successful author, you know, that's getting your content out in front of people who are reading it and you're getting paid for it, you definitely have gotten there faster.
Yeah.
So.
And in some ways, I still think you get to the other one faster too, because you go back to the cross-pollination thing. By being able to get out there in front of people faster, if you're sharing the world, yeah, you might have 2,500 of your own. And even if you don't pull any of the other 3 people, they're at least aware of your name now.
Yeah.
That cross-pollination can grow quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and product funnels and, you know, a lot of the kind of common sales, it all applies, you know, with, and, you know, the nice thing about books and electronic books and streaming content they lend themselves well to this, you know, is you can have hyperlinks, you know, you can use QR codes, you can use, you know, giveaways, you can use, I mean, old tricks are still good tricks too, right? You get to the end of the book and the first chapter of the next book is included in the end of the book, you know, right? I mean, that's something that has been happening in kind of the dime store paperbacks for, 30 years, you know, where
Yep.
and you read that and you go, oh, I'm going to go get this book too. So it's not, you know, a lot of it isn't necessarily new, but, you know, just having that plan and definitely doing it with other people sometimes makes it easier to stick to the plan. And, you know, you got people that are holding you accountable and you got people with different skills than maybe that you do. And so you can bring some of your skills and combine it with their skills and use it to put together a product funnel, you know, that's makes sense, you know, that's bringing in, you know, for my future plans, I think kind of what I'm going to do is sell paperbacks only in pairs. And so I'll have to come up with the final number, but if I can sell someone 2 paperbacks for $15 instead of selling them 1 for 10 or whatever, or even $16, $17, just be like, well, you can't buy one. Like, I don't sell 1 paperback. I sell 2. And so you can buy 2.
And then give the one away to someone that you think would like it.
And that's the thought behind it, you know, is to include, you know, a little QR bookmark or something with it, and then just be like, you know, if you like it, pass the other one on to someone else. And, you know, and then if they like it, they've got an easy way to access my Substack and find out more about me. And, you know, just trying to find ways that you can kind of, you know, find new people, get them into your, you know, your world. And, you know, and then with my Substack, the main goal is just to make sure that I'm communicating with everyone every week.
Yeah.
And giving them, you know, the content that I publish through my Substack weekly isn't even fiction. It's just me, you know, similar to like what we're doing here. You know, it's like, well, what if imagination, you know, and prayer were the same thing? Like, you know, or how do we deal with, you know, whatever, shill politicians in today's world? Like, but trying to be humorous and, you know, poking around at stuff in a way that, you know, I'm always, again, trying to bring factions together, you know. So, you know, I try to write in a way that they can be enjoyed by conservatives, liberals, urban, rural, you know, religious, non-religious. You know, and I know I've got readers of all of these because they, you know, they'll send me responses and I chit chat with some of them, at least once a month or two, they'll, send me a, like, I thought this one was pretty funny, but what about this? And so that's, I try to maintain that with my Substack, but, send content out every week at the same time, just so to keep that list fresh. And, if people aren't interacting with it over, months and months, then, I can drop them off. And
yeah.
Substack helps me find a few, like I get some signups every month that are people that are just finding me through Substack. And then I have, a few other tools, online tools and stuff I'm using to kind of make sure that I'm onboarding at least the same amount of people that I'm losing. So the list is I'm maintaining for now. And, in the next year or two, if I'm able to really get into the kind of commercial side, I guess, business side of it again, then I'll have to put some real effort into getting that list up to that kind of 10,000 number. Is really if you've got 10,000 people on your list, if it's a solid list and, they're not just people that they're kind of phony emails or whatever.
Yeah.
Then that's enough. That's, especially if I'm able to write and release, 4 to 6 books a year, then 10,000 people, that's making me a living. But yeah.
Are you planning to go back to that, or?
I would like to. I mean, I'm at that phase of life now where my kids are, 17 and 14. So, I got a few more years of wanting to make sure that I'm spending a decent amount of time with them. But, they're going to get bored of me. So the more they get toward the point where they're like, yeah, why don't you go do your own thing, Dad? Then, that's probably the plan will be to take that time and dump it back into writing. And so I've got a runway still of probably a few years before I'll be, 30, 35 hours a week writing or something like that. But for now, I think I can maintain 10. And so that's enough for me to finish at least 1 or 2 books a year. And, but yeah, as my kids age and, move into doing their own thing more, then I would like to get that back up to like maybe 30 hours a week.
Nice. How many books total have you written? I know that's kind of hard answering from the serial.
I don't know. Yeah. Somewhere between 20 and 30. Yeah. That are like finished projects that have been published in some form or fashion at some point. Available now, there's probably only like 6. But
what has been if you had to pick one thing that's been the most conducive to writing, what would you say that has been for you?
Oh, as far as just an activity or practice or
anything, if it's having a specific time you write, if it's having a certain, candle in your house, like a certain scent, like a wide world's open, just what has been most conducive to you for writing?
Walking is a major one for me. So getting out of the house, walking around, I definitely have built that into my schedule. At least five or 6 days a week. I walk at least a few miles. Cold, hot, whatever. The combination of just moving around and getting out and interacting with my environment, no earbuds for me. Like I don't listen to anything else when I walk. To me, that's time to engage with the world around me. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I space out, and I'm thinking about stuff, and I'm the kind of weird guy walking around the neighborhood talking to himself, and so even if I'm not like audibly, I know my lips are moving. I occasionally I catch a weird look from someone, like if I'm crossing, at a light or something, and we're both there, and they're kind of like looking at me because I probably walked up to the, like, like, so they're a little bit like, this guy, I'm going to let him go first. Or, I might cross the street in the other direction, even though I wasn't planning on it. So, yeah, walking is definitely one of them. And my favorite just pattern for writing is I'm not a super early morning person, but like to be able to get up, cook breakfast. When I do breakfast, even if I'm cooking it for other people, if my kids are, whatever, like I don't interact with my family when I'm cooking breakfast. That's podcast time. So that's when I have my headphones on. And so I start my day with cooking and like podcast content. And then I move into reading. And so I'll sit down and like paper, read something and reflect and pray and just kind of like process. Then my writing time. So like I've found if I do that, then by the time I sit down to write, I mean, it might be anywhere from 9:30 to 10:30 or whatever. But like then like until 1 or 2, it's just condensed. It's, I'm firing the whole time, just hit my word limit. And I like to try to have a word limit. So 3,000 words, like if I'm, being able to hit it at least a couple times a week, then I'll be like, okay, I'm going to try to get to 3,000 every time I sit down, which isn't a ton. I mean, there are some people that would do 1,000. Some people I know can do 10,000 in the amount that I would do 3,000. It's, all over the spectrum, but
yeah.
And then the evenings, and this has gotten all mussed up with my kids being older now because they stay up late. It used to be, though, that everyone else in the house was asleep. And so then, from like 11 o'clock until midnight or 1 in the morning would be like my time to just, sit on the couch and look at the ceiling or sit on the stoop and, watch the street, or wander around and, again, talk to myself. And that's the kind of time where stuff is brewing and coming together for the next day.
Yeah.
And so that's being able to have that time is another one that's just makes night and day difference for me. Like if I have that time to just, kind of like, like what would this character do next? Then, by the time I hit the computer at, the next morning at 9:30, I'm firing on all cylinders and I already know exactly where I want to go and what I want to do. If I don't get that time the night before, then it might be a little choppier. I'll just start writing because but it's going to be like, I might go back and delete half of it and like stumble through before I'm like, okay, this is what's going to happen.
You're kind of repeating in that time what you would have done in the evening.
Yeah, if I had that kind of like, so I guess just processing space. Yeah, and because I think I'm a verbal processor, I think this is why I end up talking to myself. It just helps me format what I want to do. And so, yeah.
I can definitely...
If there's people in the room, talking to myself is a little weirder. So it's easier if everyone else has gone to bed or I'm, walking around the neighborhood or whatever.
Yeah. I have a hard time processing in my head. I either need to write it out, which then if I'm trying to write a story, it hasn't worked. But I've found even just writing it out to like ChatGPT, like just write some of my thoughts just to force myself to get it out. Not that I use anything It's almost like having, okay, I'm just going to have a friend I can talk to for a minute, throw my ideas out there, because it's the act of me. It's not even that I want to know what it says about it. It's like the act of forcing me to formulate it enough to put it forward.
So they can understand what I'm saying.
Yep. It's that process has helped me solidify my thoughts on things. And without that, the only way I've found is actually talking to someone.
Yeah.
Terry, my wife, has had me talk her ear off a number of times because I just need to process it out loud. I don't know where I'm going, don't know what I'm doing, but I need to speak aloud until I figure it out.
I guess to that sense, I am capable of being my own GPT. Because, I just need to, I can argue with myself, and I do fairly frequently, and I'll represent both. No, that's not right. That's stupid. Oh, well, maybe I do agree with that. Like, I can definitely, like, I only need myself to have a full-fledged debate. So
I think that's a skill a lot of people have to hone. Sometimes I can do that with myself. In software development, there's a concept of if you can't figure out a problem, they call it rubber ducking. Literally just put a rubber duck on your desk and force yourself to say aloud what your problem is and what steps you've taken or are trying to take to get there. And it's just forcing yourself to speak aloud. But a lot of people don't know how to talk directly to themselves. So just put a rubber duck there and talk to it.
Yeah, no, I've had to hone this skill over the life of my marriage because my wife cannot argue for herself to save her life. And so, I mean, I grew up in an argumentative family. I mean, that's like our hobby, our pastime is, argument. And so, like, and to be such a verbal processor. And so it's like when we would have an argument, like, she was totally helpless. Would just be like, she needs to go away. And, then I'm just completely frustrated. So early on, I just learned, like, okay, I am going to figure out her argument because I know where she stands. Like, I know she doesn't agree with me, but, like, I will give her her argument, and then I'll give her my argument. And then I'll help her argue against my argument. And it just became something that I just knew how to do. And for the sake of a healthy marriage, it was like, I know, she just wants it to be quiet and then to come back later. And so to an extent, we have to do that. But at the same time, like, I need to have an argument, or I'm going to be totally miserable for the next 24 hours. Like, so here, let me argue for both of us. And that became like an acceptable compromise, once I became good enough at it, to where I'd be like, and is this not your argument? She'd be like, yeah, that's exactly my argument. And so maybe, honing that skill has given me the ability to now just argue with myself.
Strongmanning someone's position is really good anyways to be able to do.
Yeah, and I totally value that, and for sure in any of the content that I listen to or read, like if it's nonfiction, I won't even pay attention to it if it's someone who's disrespecting the other viewpoint.
Yeah,
I'm out. But if I can tell from the very beginning that they're trying to understand validly, like, the other person and why they think what they think, and they're representing it to the best, of their ability, and strong manning instead of straw manning, then that I'll listen to. I mean, they could be on the total opposite end of, of what I believe, but if they're trying to be respectful to what I believe, then I'll totally listen to it. But I mean, if somebody's just, talking about how stupid these people are, like, I'm out. Like, it just,
it's not interesting at that point.
Yeah, it feels harmful to me.
Yeah,
honestly, like, imbibing it, I think is damaging, and I just, I know, like, within, evangelical circles, typically it's more like, well, if the content's bad, right, like, I don't want to take it in. I'm fine with watching violent stuff, destructive, like that stuff doesn't rub off on me as much as someone being disrespectful.
Yeah.
It leaves me feeling gross. Cut someone's head off, whatever. Like, it's not real to me. Like, I can watch that and I don't feel like I have to go cut someone's head off.
Yeah.
But like if I listen to someone just vitriolically, tearing down other people, like that feels harder to walk away from without it like being on me, And so I just, especially, it became especially acute, right, with I think the first Trump election, of just like, the divisions just kind of started to like appear. Fissures were growing, and then the pandemic and like everything. I was just like, oh man, like I had to just step away from anything that is just like from either side that's just like so poisonous.
Yeah.
That was just making me like feel angry at everyone and bad about the world to where, but I mean, if someone wants to talk about very serious issues and very sad things, but like from an honest perspective, that doesn't make me feel depressed. I mean, I can listen to a podcast about everyone being, dying in, Gaza, and like, it's terrible, and sad, but like, doesn't leave me feeling as hopeless as someone, spraying, anti one side or the other vitriol, that's just like, ugh.
Yep. I remember growing up, my mom grew up extremely conservative Christian, staunch 7-day creationist. But she took the time to teach us evolution, because it's like, you don't understand your own position if you can't understand the other side, and you need to be able to talk both sides, and there's no point in talking down to each other about either side. And so I always enjoyed arguing. I used to, as a kid, I would argue the side I didn't believe in just because, most of the people around you are going to agree with you on most things. So I found it more interesting to let me just take the other side.
Yeah.
Like, then we can have more discussion.
Yeah.
And at some point I stopped doing that because it seemed like it was just upsetting everybody. So but I miss that a lot.
I still do that. Yeah, I am inevitably the liberal in the conservative room and the conservative in the liberal room. I just can't help it.
It's more fun.
Yeah. But yeah, we do the same thing with our kids. Like, we'd pick them up after like an Awana or something, at the local Baptist church. And, so what did you guys learn? And so they'd be like, oh, well, we studied Genesis and this and, 7 days. And like, it's like, well, what did you think about it? Well, that seemed a little like, and I'm like, well, some people believe that. Some people, believe that it happened, over, hundreds of thousands, millions of years, and like, so, yeah. And so that's just my nature, I think, just to be like, what you learn there is totally an acceptable thing for people to believe, and that's fine. But you don't have to believe it if you don't want to. Like, I might even go as far as to be like, here's some things that I personally agree with and don't agree with, but whatever. You don't have to like believe what I believe either, but yeah, it's definitely, I think the worst thing, the last thing I want to do, is to just have them be 18 and leave home and be like, well, I didn't even know the rest of this stuff was out here, because then I think that's highly likely they're going to feel betrayed and lied to, and how is that, going to be helpful?
Yeah.
So
I've always kind of took it as the approach, a parent's job is to prepare them to be fully capable adults.
Right.
Like, you have to introduce appropriate amounts of the world to them as they're old enough, such that then they can operate fully.
Yeah, exactly.
But, well, so if people wanted to follow your work, where would they do that? We mentioned Substack.
Yeah, Substack is my home. I don't even know if I could remember. It's like, is it Substack David Mark Brown, or is it David Mark Brown / Substack?
I'll throw it in the description.
Yeah, but it's essentially David Mark. If you look for David Mark Brown, I think you're going to find me. There used to be an astronaut, but he died long enough ago that he doesn't have much of a Google imprint anymore. So if you Google David Mark Brown at this point, I think 8 of the top 10 responses are going to be me. I haven't checked recently, but hopefully there's not another granola redneck trying to steal my redneck granola.
I didn't see any granola redneck. I think when I Googled you, the first 2 pages were all you, and then I think page 3 I found a doctor.
Okay. And yeah, so David Mark Brown, but yeah, you'll see I'm sure other things that are mostly dormant. David Mark Brown Writes is my website. I'll bring that back eventually. Like I said, I think that's probably where I'll sell my print books and stuff from. And I mean, there's tons of old blog posts there, but I haven't actively been doing anything there for probably 8 or 9 years. The Substack is where I hang out. So David Mark Brown at Substack, that's my, and I plan on that being my home forever if it works out.
Nice.
I've enjoyed Substack. I like it. I think it's real readable. It's an easy way for me to get messages out to my list, as well as I can stream content there and make stuff available there. And so I haven't really been active on any other social media sites since not doing the business anymore. And it's not fulfilling for me. It's not life-giving for me to be on social media. And so I've
let it go.
I've just cut it out. Since I'm not doing it for work anymore, I don't enjoy it. And so I've just stopped. So, I don't, if anyone tried to, ping me on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, I probably just wouldn't even see it. And I doubt that's going to change unless as I try to reboot the commercial end of stuff, if I decide that I need at least one other place to interact with people, I will. I mean, you can comment on Substack, and I can comment back to people, and so they've been gradually kind of adding a few little messaging abilities and stuff on there.
Nice.
And so that's probably where I'll live. I mean, if someone commented or, messaged me on Substack, I would see it. So.
Cool. I had one final thing I thought of when I was researching to prep for the episode. One of the things I came across is at one point you taught a writing class for I believe it was 7 to 17-year-olds. You offered it once or twice.
Yeah. That's actually how, I'm caregiving for a gal now. I met her at the library through that. Yeah, I was providing, tutoring, kind of stuff briefly. Yeah, that was one thing I was doing for a spell.
Have you thought of doing anything like that again?
Oh, I doubt it.
Is that kind of fulfilled by, the writing group now? That we do?
Yeah. I mean, working with other authors and collaborative stuff, absolutely. I mean, but I don't even really remember. I'm trying to remember how. Yeah, at one point that was just one thing that I launched. I had I think 4 people paying me to. It was for mostly homeschooled kids, and their parents were looking for something to add to the curriculum. And so I was like, well, at one point there was a brief flirtation with maybe I would build up my clientele this way and get 50 or 60 clients and and make this like a side hustle. And yeah, I don't even really remember why I backed off of that. But yeah, I mean, the entrepreneurial side of me, I'll start things and just like, try
it for a little.
Yeah, not going to do that anymore. And so like there's 2 or 3 dozen things like that I've done at one point or another. I think my redneckgranola.com right now, if someone were to go there, it's like the remnants of my web design business. So for a while, I was designing WordPress sites for people, and so some of those are still around. I'm still hosting some of them for people just because I'm like, whatever, like I'll just leave it here. But yeah, another one of those mini ventures that I did temporarily.
Fun. I had just come across it and it piqued my interest.
Yeah, I had totally forgotten about that one. I don't know, how did you even find it?
I just Googled around and poked around.
Yeah, so there's all these remnants. The internet is forever. And I'm not super detail oriented, so I forget to go take stuff down after I've given up on it.
I don't remember who said it, but someone told me, what are software developers skilled at? It's not writing code, it's efficient Googling.
Google foo. Yeah, that's important.
That's going away a little bit with AI. Now just AI searches everything, but it used to be,
Yeah, and I guess in the old days, it's having good Google foo was definitely a skill. So instead of spending like 3 hours on something, you could just, 3 minutes in.
Yep. But, well, thanks for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, a lot of fun. Thanks, Brenton.
Yeah, I think we'll have plenty of more conversations aside from this. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, for sure.
But, well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.